Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us on our first go at doing a short version, a half-hour webinar. And we'd like to firstly welcome, or I'd like to welcome John Somerset, who should be very well known to a lot of people. John is the absolute guru of finances and benchmarking for schools. And Sue Ellson, who is known very much for LinkedIn and helping people with social media types of issues. So we're all going to just speak for a short period of time and see what people feel about our views on life. So I'm going to start with first for about a 10-minute, 8 to 10 minute presentation, to which I'm going to start bringing my slides up. So what I want to talk about is ACARA. So the ACARA data for 2023 just came out literally about a month ago, and we've now pushed it through all of our mapping and data. But I think it's really interesting for anybody in this sector to understand what's happening with the numbers. So the first point is from 2022 to 2023, there was actually 49,000 additional students. Now, of that, 64% still go to government school, 18.4% to some form of Catholic school, and 17.4% to independent school. So what's really interesting is the total number only increased by 1.21%. And from that, the government actually only rose 0.34%, which is quite low. Now, Catholic education went a little bit better than the total number, 1.71. But what's really been amazing for the last 4 years especially is independent schools went up again another 3.98 or 4%. So I always say to people, think of it like the share market. If you went up 4%, you just went up with the all ordinaries. If you went up better than 4%, doing something right or some things are working in your favor. And if you didn't go up 4% or you went a much lesser figure or even went backwards, just be aware the market has moved up 4%. Now, this chart could be a bit of a staggering you with numbers, but what we like to show here, and it'll be available in the slides, is the actual numbers for Australia. And we can also show this on a state-by-state basis, which we did recently in an article that we published on our LinkedIn and our website. But I guess the most interesting points I find here is most people we're talking to are independent or Catholic schools. And at the moment, you can see those numbers I quoted. But what's more relevant is if we take 2019 to 2023, 2019 being pre-COVID, and what was quite a bit of an exodus in 2020 from schools coming out of government and going into mainly into independent. Independent schools are actually up 14.14% above what they were in 2019. So again, if you think it's the share market, you should be up about 14% above because that is what the market did. Now, we know a lot of schools aren't taking more students. Few of the big boys schools down here in Melbourne are definitely sort of in freeze, but means other schools are taking more. But even in this last year, you can see the 3.98% increase in independent schools. So the issues I see is most relevant in this. 2019 to 2022, up 8.81%, but more by the time we got to 2023, 14%. Is this sustainable, or is this good fortune of COVID? And now will it start to reverse as harder economic times come on? Now, I think I'm not trying to be an economic soothsayer. To me, that's an obvious that's likely to happen, or we seem to be feeling the squeeze. And especially in the Victorian situation where independent schools are getting hit, if they're over $15,000 of fees, they're now having to pay payroll tax. So effective 1st of July 2024, non-government schools with an income per student greater than 15,000 will be subject to payroll tax. So my point, and the numbers that I'm seeing, is saying numbers are up, things have been good, don't get complacent, because as we get a bit tighter in economics and we no longer have that effect of the COVID, people pulling out of government schools into independent, I think you're going to see quite a bit of a difference. Second issue I want to touch on in my little time is the co-ed issue. What we're really seeing is, I'm going to use the comparison, I apologise to anyone else, between Victoria and New South Wales. Now, these figures are a couple of years old because I wrote an article that was published in AHESA about 2 years ago. But at that point in time, so I'm probably using the 2021 AHESA ACARA numbers, what we were seeing was Victoria was at about 86.5% co-ed, only about 4% all boys, and about 9% all girls schools. Now, Victoria's been the most interesting one where we've seen the big boys' schools go co-ed over 30 to 40 years now. I'll touch on that in a minute. But I want you to look at New South Wales by comparison. 70%, 71% at co-ed, 14% boys, 14% girls. And everyone can see the different ones of their own state of where they sit somewhere in between that. Now, I'm going to use the Victorian scenario because my view is we're heading into this same sort of space, especially in Sydney. We already know Cranbrook and Newington have announced they're actually starting to phase in girls in 2026. I thought it was 2025. I read the web, and sure enough, they're saying they're going to bring in certain classes in 2026. But Victoria's been going this way for 40 plus years. And Carey was the first main one in about 1978. So originally, Victoria had associated grammar schools and associated public schools, which were the boys' schools. There were 20 of them across Melbourne, Geelong and Kilmore, Assumption and Kilmore. There are now only 8 all-boys schools, and they're full. Scotch College, St Kevin's, they're really not looking for more numbers. So of the 12 APS, AGS schools that went co-ed, some now have gone like double campuses. Haileybury's multi-campus, Ivanhoe Grammar, Wesley, Caulfield, all put in second full-size campuses. And we can now actually see around 12,000 girls are listed as going to those 12 schools. So good, and that's about 30% of their total numbers. So I guess the question we have very much is, where are the girls going now, or what's happening to the schools that were all girls schools in Melbourne if about 12,000 of the high fee paying girls have now gone off to these various big co-ed schools? Now, I guess that's not a question I can answer other than to say, I think the pressure is coming on a lot of girls' schools. I'm seeing it here in Melbourne, definitely, and I imagine it could be happening in other places. It seems like education is heading more towards co-ed than the full boys, full girls schools. Whether that's right, wrong, not me, not commenting. I'm just making the point that that seems to be what the numbers are showing. And I guess that what that leaves us with is the pressure that's going to come onto the all-girls schools, of which there is definitely a lot more of than there are all-boys schools. And I guess if we go back to those Melbourne numbers, we can actually see only about 4.3% of all boys go to all boys schools, and about 9% of all girls are going to all girls schools. So they're the points I wanted to make. And on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and hopefully this will be of some relevance to you going forward. Spectrum Analysis is obviously our company, and we're very happy to help you. We do a lot of schools, and we're very happy to talk to people going forward. John, I'd like to throw over to you. You might give yourself a quick introduction and let's see what you can tell us about what's happening.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me on today. It's very interesting, those statistics. I didn't actually prepare any specific slides. I just thought I'd hear what you had to say and just talk to that. As you may know, I've had almost 30 odd years in chartered accounting, 25, 27, just sticking to my knitting, which is financial analysis of schools. So I run a financial benchmarking survey across Australia and New Zealand, which has about 600 schools in it, representing, you showed there 700 and something students in independent schools and 700 in Catholic, The survey is mostly independent. I've got about 520 odd thousand enrolments, or 540 odd thousand enrolments. So it's 60 to 70% of the market, actually. So it's really, really good data that you can then compare your metrics against. A couple of things there. Obviously, the growth in both Catholic and independent schools. So that brings with it growing pains. So that's, having to build more general learning areas and buildings and so forth, and therefore having to borrow to do that. I just ran a post survey, satisfaction survey, actually, Peter, and hot off the press actually last night. And some of the top concerns, by the way, 8 out of 10 gave the survey satisfaction of 4 to 5 stars. But interestingly, I asked what the main concerns were, what keeps you awake at night? And the top 3 concerns are securing staff and wage increases. The next one is cash flow and funding building costs and needs, and especially with rising building costs. And then student and staff ratios. Then, as an equal 4th concern, changes in government funding, enrolments, loan servicing, and inflation. You mentioned, Peter, inflation there. That schools are worried about, we've got these increases in wages, shortage of staff pushing wages up, as well as just general wage increases. In New South Wales, I think government schools put them up by 12 or 15%. So how it's the school's ability to pass on that through increased fees in probably coming into a fairly challenging economic area. So there's 2 types of schools. Obviously, there's those that are growing, Peter, with those extra enrolments. So they've got to fund the extra building and borrowing and cash flow to do that. They've got fee pressure because of the economy, and also maybe adjusting of government funding with the new DMI measures kicking in. And the other side of the coin, those schools where they might be losing some enrolments. And we work with both types of schools. They have different pressures. And I think it's probably, the major concern there where they mentioned student-teacher ratios, I think that's probably more coming from the schools that maybe are in the declining enrolment situation. I always say it doesn't matter whether your enrolments are going up or down, you can still be financially sustainable. The absolute key to that is recognising the trends, partly what you're teasing out there, Peter, but teasing out the financial trends. And most importantly, the secret ingredient is actually responding to it and making some changes as a result of that. So pretty much 10 times out of 10, schools can remain financially sustainable if they've recognised there's a shift and then adjusting enrolment. So if you're in a school where your enrolments are perhaps under pressure, then you might need to look at your staffing ratios. And by going into the survey, we've got a staff estimator tool where you can select a sample of similar schools, you can put in your enrolments for 2024, and it will tell you what staff by which category, based on the sample average, you should have. So if you've had a drop in enrolments, you put their decreased enrolment in, it says these are the staff numbers. Not saying you can get to that, but at least it gives you something to aim for. And then it's the ability to then take that to the board and then actually adapt your operations, because the alternative is not adjusting operations with wages being 80% of your cost and getting the school into financial difficulty and not being able to service your loans and replace your assets. For the schools that are growing then, with the increased enrolments and you're borrowing more, you need to look at the surpluses that you're generating compared to the debt that you have to service. And we've got a fantastic new tool, Peter, which we introduced at the end of last year called a SKI scenario, SKI being Somerset Key Indicator scenario tool. What you basically do with that, it takes in 2 years worth of historical data, just highly summarised information, highly summarised budget data for the next 5 years. So you can see, okay, here's my budget and here are the key metrics, and it compares you against similar schools. You can go to another area and go, okay, what if my enrolments are, $100 under? Bang, it completely recalculates your financial statements and recalculates all your ratios. So what I'm finding with schools that are financially sustainable are the ones that are doing this type of scenario analysis on a regular basis, taking that to the board, and then the next step, the board is actually making some changes. So I guess what I'm saying is all of this can be addressed, whether you've got increased enrolments or decreased enrolments. You've just got to model it, financially model it, take it to a board in a digestible format that you can then make an informed decision and then adapt to those changes. So that's really what I wanted to say there. Just all of this is manageable, but it does come back to to governance and senior management, and the ability to adapt to those changing circumstances. So I'm not sure whether that helps everyone. And
Thank you. Thank you, John. I just want to make a comment on the back of what John said. We've just upgraded all our mapping. So many of these schools have our spectrum analysis geomapping plus, which you can get through Somerset as well if you want the level 3. But the schools we've worked with, we've just upgraded that. It always, for all schools, so it's got 9,000 schools in it, you can see the staff to student ratio, and it's just been updated with the fees structure. Now, the latest data, and we were able to get it downloaded from ACARA, got permission, is it talks about 2022. So it tells how much money you collected from fees, parents' contributions, etc., divide by the number of students, and it therefore creates $1 per student. And we've left it in our system so we can see what it was in 2020 and see what it is in 2022 for every one of the schools in Australia. So that's something we've just done as well to try and help with this metrics to allow you to compare to other schools and what those different ratios are. Thanks, John. Look, that was really good. I'm a total supporter of your stuff, your material. I'm a big one on benchmarking, and I think every school should be involved. So it's great that you're getting big numbers into your surveys. On that note, I'm going to introduce Sue. Sue has some different things to John and I. And Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Great to be here. And thank you, John, as well. There was a quick question from Adam in the chat. Is it money or social change that is driving that change in?
Sue, I've lost you.
You just muted there, Sue, for a second.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There was a question from Adam, and he in the chat, and it was based on Peter's presentation. Is it money or social change that is adjusting those enrolments, do you think?
Oh, gee, I think there's a social change going on to the drive to co-ed personally, but I'm not here to, it's just my opinion. I just think, and some of the boys' schools have let themselves down a little bit over the years, and maybe they're paying a bit of that penalty as well. So I think that's the bigger part there. And the money is just, my view is we're seeing or hearing of, maybe people, instead of going to the full fee school at $30,000 a year, there are some quite good independent or Christian schools and things like that at $10,000, $15,000 a year. And look, people on this call much more than me will know what percentage of cases right now that the grandparents are paying for these at these big schools. And I gather it's a number that is growing rapidly because it's just becoming out of the reach of even two people working, with a young family. So they're my sort of takes of what I'm hearing and seeing. So an uneducated comment. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Adam.
I could probably add a little bit too, Sue, if you want.
Yep.
I mean, I've had over 20 years on school boards, so we talk about these things all the time. Obviously, it's the drop-off. So, parents, they're busy, and if they can drop off at one spot rather than having to run to the boys' school and the girls' school, that's a big part of it as well. But my words of encouragement, I guess, is if you are a single-sex school, I actually see that as a sustainable competitive advantage. If there's sort of, I suppose if that's assuming that some of these schools that were single-sex have now gone co-ed, well, that means that there's less single-sex schools, and there's lots of research about the benefits of single-sex schooling in girls and boys. So, play that strategically to your advantage, and just honestly, from a financial perspective, Peter, it's fixable. If you get to it early enough, it's actually pretty much always fixable. Just get to it early enough and model it. It takes the stress and worry out of it. So I think there's a couple of positives in all of that as well.
Yeah, I guess I've been looking at it from the Victorian, being Melbourne based, of what's happened here, and it seems the others are following, but quite slowly compared to what's happened here over the last 20, 30 years with the big schools. Anyway, Suze, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the online world and give you some information on a couple of resources that you can check out. And one of the first ones is an article, there's a little bit of background on me, is an article I wrote for Educate Plus's face-to-face yearly magazine that came out at the end of last year. From search engine result pages to chat experience result pages. So a lot of people will be using platforms like ChatGPT, Google, Gemini, and Microsoft Copilot, and they're using those environments to find information about schools and information on what is a good school in my local area. So we really need to make sure that schools are found in those results. Now, a lot of times I've noticed with schools that the website department does not talk to the social media department. And this is an issue because the content really needs to be added to the website, because that's where the information is collected for these chat robots, and that's what is indexed in their data sets and in the results that come out. So I've also created another article on the existing terminology you may be familiar with. So when did we first start seeing artificial intelligence? When we had predictive text on our mobile phones many, many years ago, but it's moved on from there. So if you would like to understand some of the terminology, you can click on that link and go through there. And the other thing I'd just like to point your attention to is the amount of time that people do spend on social media. And for example, if TikTok is their favorite platform and they decide they want to find out information about a school on TikTok and they're already on TikTok, they'll go looking for information within an application. It could be Facebook, it could be TikTok, it could be LinkedIn, it could be any number of different things. But I just want to remind you that there are algorithms and artificial intelligence within those platforms to say, look, we've seen that you've looked at that before, perhaps you may be interested in this information again. So to create a visual representation of that, the only asset that you own online is your website. And when a search comes in to look at your website and index that content in Google or in Bing, or as we now realize with AI, it's going to go out and have a look at your social media presence and how active you are there. It's going to look for online reviews. And so you need to have Facebook reviews to appear in Bing reviews, and you need to have Google reviews to appear in Google reviews. Your directory listings, so you can have free website links on your white pages, yellow pages, and true local listings, and then any other links on other websites. Now, obviously, if you're on an independent schools list or a Catholic schools list, that can be helpful to you, but any government websites and so on, it increases the profile of your internet presence for your school. And I was working with a school in Tasmania, and they looked for their school in the chatbots and they weren't found at all. So this, is a great concern if you're not going to be found in those queries in those environments. So what is happening with AI is, instead of just doing searches within Google or Bing, people are becoming prompt engineers and coming up with really sophisticated queries to try and find the answers they want. So I can imagine in the future, they might even ask the chatbots, what's your staff to student ratio? What's the annual profit? What's the average wage of teachers? What's the gender pay gap for that employer? So keep these things in mind about information that your school is happy to publish. Within these environments, there's also various biases, algorithm changes that can occur at any time. There's integrations that may or may not be able to access some of that data. Obviously, risk and reward, cybersecurity issues with how much information to publish, whether it's going to be behind a paywall. If it is, people are not going to be able to see that. And also any integrations that you have with software as a service products. They may also be passing data on to somewhere else. So I'd just like to remind you that as a school, your only owned online asset is your website. And so as much information as possible to be published on there would be fantastic. The only owned people asset you have is not all your subscribers on any platform, it's your email or SMS list. And I often say to schools, if you really want to make sure you can contact someone, perhaps the best way is to send them an SMS. Most people will still look at their text messages, but won't always see their emails. Overall, I would suggest your goal is to make sure that your website content is indexed. So as a general rule, I recommend that you publish posts on your website with the latest news. And then if you share that content on your social media, you provide links to the social media posts. and also do some queries and open at least 3 artificial intelligence chatbots, Microsoft Copilot via Bing, Google, Gemini, and ChatGPT, and Google the name of your school, Google the name of the type of your school, Google the name of schools and your suburbs, and see what sort of results you are getting. And you will see a broad difference between each of the platforms, and that will give you some insights as to the type of information that would be advantageous for you to include on your website, so that in the future, when another scrape goes through and the AI picks up all the data, it picks up that extra information. Now, Peter did mention I'm well known for my LinkedIn expertise, so I thought I'd throw in a couple of specific tips around LinkedIn. I encourage all schools to aim for 80% of the Year 11 or Year 12 students to list your school in the education section of their LinkedIn profile before they leave the school. That's why I said it's in Year 11, because Year 12 gets a bit chaotic. So if they can create their profile in Year 11, when you do create their profile, do not say that they are a student, because that limits some capability on the platform. So just say they're an adult looking for work, because, I mean, let's face it, a lot of students do look for part-time work, but you don't want them to be listed as a student when they join, because it creates problems of them accessing their account. So just a couple of tips there. Now, on your school page on LinkedIn, you can do something called create a newsletter. And when you create a newsletter on LinkedIn, it automatically sends notifications to all of your school page followers, which would include all your alumni who have listed it, and all of the people who follow, all of the staff, and anybody else who's interested in the school. So the same content you put on a public newsletter, you could add to LinkedIn as a newsletter, and that will extend the reach of your school's content. I also encourage you, if you haven't looked at it for a while, to look at your LinkedIn school page. There are several new sections that require you to fill in details. And if you post weekly on LinkedIn, it will double the amount of engagement you get. And the final tip there is all of your followers, you can see if you go into analytics who your followers are. And if you manually ask them, I know that's a big ask, but you might be able to find some students or volunteers willing to do this. But if you can message all of those followers and ask them to click the notification bell and choose see all new posts, then that is going to make sure that the content shared on your LinkedIn page goes further and wider. So they're my little tips, and we are now open for questions. If anybody has any of those, we've got 2 minutes before our due date is off, or if anybody would like to make a comment, feel free to unmute or raise your hand or pop something in the chat. We're happy to answer your questions.
You must have done a good job.
Yeah, we must have covered all bases. Well,
okay,
isn't it good to have a meeting that finishes on time?
Finish on time. Okay, well, look, thank you for your time, everybody. Sue will be putting this out and the video out, and hopefully there's some good ideas for you, and feel free to ring myself or John or Sue. Our details are easily findable, I'll say it that way, and look forward to keeping in touch and hopefully working with you in the future. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Janine, for your comment. Very thought-provoking. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Alan. And Guy, you've also said thank you. That's great. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.